Psychologists of Reddit, what made you realize you were treating a psychopath? It's a video about psychopaths, so it's gonna get a bit soul crushing at times. Enjoy. Clinical psychologist here. At first I didn't know. If anything, given the context, he was more put together than most of my patients. The subject of his criminal past came up. I only knew he had served prison time some years before, not what he was in for. I had met with him a month or two when this came up. Turns out it was 2 separate sentences served. Both were for rape. In both cases he was the exact thing we are afraid of, a guy lurking in a dark alley jumping a drunk girl. He told me about these things, as if he was talking about the weather. When it dawned on me that he expressed no remorse or guilt whatsoever, I got the same cold, gut-wrenching kind of primal fear you feel when you're out for a walk and almost step on a snake. Current psychologist working in a prison here. I've worked with 3 individuals I dare say would have met the criteria for antisocial personality disorder within the last 2 weeks. One commonality is that they use behaviors as tools to benefit only themselves. Self-harm not because they wish to hurt themselves, but to use it as a tool to lure staff into the cell to incite violence / gain extra medication / be sent to the SHU, which comes with a status boost. One person offered to get me a comfortable chair when we were in a session, not for my benefit, but so that they could ensure I stuck around for longer to talk with them. A lot of positive impression management also. Sometimes you feel they care, but there's unfortunately an ulterior motive. When I was a student, we had an interview with a lady that killed her baby child with a handgun because it cried so much that she couldn't take it. At first we weren't told that she was a psychopath, and we were just told to listen to her side of the story. She was reading us from her journal that she made while she was in the institution. Not once did she mention that she was sad that her baby died or how what she did was bad. She was just reading angry thoughts about her husband that left her and turned her into the police about what she did. She was justifying the killing because the baby was so unbearable, and once she mentioned that she was angry and mad that her husband did not believe her, that she didn't have any other choice but to kill the baby. She was very smart and well spoken, and the whole time she was speaking she was trying to make us feel sorry for her being locked up. We later learned that sometimes she was lying about not killing her baby and other times just brag about it, depending on who she was speaking with. Very normal looking person and very good speaker. So like most top posts in this thread, there's a million questions. Here OP has just added an edit instead of answering each individual comment. So to answer some of your questions. I'm not from the US and I don't think her name will matter to any of you. She was not schizophrenic, nor had postpartum psychosis. If she did, she would have felt any kind of remorse about what she did, which she did not. When I said normal person, I meant it in a way that, if I was talking to her in any other situation but this, in a mental institution, I would have no idea that she is a psychopath. She killed her baby only for one simple reason. At the moment it just wouldn't stop crying. She didn't try to hide it or anything. At first she lied to her husband that it was by accident, but then she admitted it. When telling that he kept thinking about how killing people would be more fun than lame animals, stray cats and dogs and everything else he could catch. Only 11 years old. Everybody always thinks of psychopaths as some clever devious, Silence of the Lambs types, but what about the ones that are thick as 2 short planks? Plenty of them getting locked up in prisons every day. It's less oh no my primal fear receptors and more oh no I have to listen to Barry the boring cunt wax lyrical about himself for another hour. Not a psychologist, but a nurse who sees way too many psych cases. One time I had a patient who was brought in after trying to break into a family's house while they were home. He was on my telemetry unit because his electrolytes were out of whack, and he was acting like he didn't remember trying to bust into an entire family's house with them home. He was getting antsy, but the hospital I worked at had a stupid fall risk policy that kept patients in bed, even if they were young / healthy / capable of being responsible for their fall. Mental health patients like to pace, especially when they start to feel like they are using it. So, anyway, I'm trying to keep dude in bed, because if his feet touch the floor a loud alarm would go off, pushing his crazy ass closer to the edge. So, I'm in there trying to talk to him and de-escalate. We are talking and he tells me he is a bad person, that his cat was mutilated, and his sister asked what happened to it, and he told her the dog did it. But, he told me that his secret is that he did it. He killed the cat so bad that it looked like a dog ripped it to pieces. He also shared with me that he knew what he was doing when he tried breaking into the family's home, and that he wants to hurt people. Of course, I shared this info with the hospitalist and the psychologist, and, naturally, he was discharged free and clear the next day. No follow up with the law or outpatient psych. Gotta love it. You feel it in your gut first. Using a validated measure and constructing a thorough case history to discuss in supervision. This is how you test your gut feeling. But you feel it often quite quickly. It tends to begin with just a sense that something is off. When you're doing therapy with someone, we tend to build up quite a strong rapport with people. So there's lots of micromimicry going on, and you start to tune in quite deeply to unconscious body language. When you're in this state, sometimes you just start to feel very uneasy, and you can't articulate verbally exactly why yet. This is often because of subtle macro expressions, super fast flashes of emotion, lasting fractions of a second, that we perceive, but don't consciously register. You see flashes of contempt-related emotions and burglar smiles, basically emotions related to dominance and deception. The next thing you'll notice is a lot of use of projection going on. This starts quite quickly, usually in an assessment session. I mean, as an aside, being assessed by someone else can feel quite threatening to anyone's self-image, let alone a psychopath's. Quite predictably there will be status challenges, asking you about your credentials, your experience, etc., and then often some put-downs and digs with plausible deniability. For instance, joking that all psychologists are mad themselves, or just turning the tables by asking who's the maddest person you've ever treated. You start to feel on the back foot, and like you're now being assessed by them. As time continues, they will attribute a lot of their own emotions to you as the projection deepens. For instance, commenting that you look sad, asking if you're okay, or conversely asking why you got angry just then. As time passes, their effect turns from micro-expressions to more overt dominance displays, leaning back, smirking, getting up and striding around, etc. By this point your initial gut feeling is getting more supportive evidence, and it's time to bust out the validated measures. The biggest sign of all is a general unwillingness to show any vulnerability at all, or to be in a one-down position. The engagement will be superficial, often pally or matey, with lots of banter and joking, always flying close to the wind of outright mockery and contempt. They will start subtly and increasingly become overt in their need to control and dominate the therapy sessions. If the therapist maintains an aloof control, the ante may keep being raised, and even end up with overt intimidation of the therapist. If you don't mind me asking, how do you deal with a patient when they get to that stage? Do you try to de-escalate in some way? Fortunately, it doesn't happen very often. Most clients, even with histories of violence etc., have bought into some minimal social contract that you are here to help them. If they've got to that point of taking a chair with you, if it gets to that point, it might mean the psychologist has missed some earlier warning signs or not dealt with them too well. If it does happen though, then normally you would call for help and or also use de-escalation. When working with clients where violence is a risk, you'd always have either a panic button on your desk, or on your badge/lanyard, or at least someone nearby who can hear you call out. An apology and appeasing body language can go a long way too. In my experience, unintentionally intimidating behavior can be more common. For instance, one client used to get quite deep into rage towards someone from his past, but enacted towards me, standing over me, pointing and shouting, etc. I would have an agreement in place with a client that either of us can time out the session and we just stop and take a breather. That tends to help. Often there is a particular face they make when they are relating a story, usually about how clever they are. One of the TED Talks on how to spot a liar calls it duping delight. Sometimes they can't contain their rage and you see them switch. Robot editor note, I've left the TED Talk in the doobly-doo. I'm a mental health professional working in corrections, maximum security facility. In my experience, Psychopaths will have this predatory stare, especially when they are trying to manipulate you. It is completely unnerving and hard to describe to someone unfamiliar with this population. They also tend to be narcissistic and overly charming, making a point to be overly friendly with you. The eyes, when they believe they are supposed to put on an emotion. You have to understand. It's going ouch when you bang your funny bone, even though it doesn't hurt, because all your life, people have cried out in pain when they've banged their elbow. You meet enough people like that, and you find yourself hating any obligational situation in your life when you have to lie, like being asked how you are, and saying good when you're not, simply because all you can associate it with is them. I typed out a long response to this, but then deleted it, because I couldn't really describe it without giving too many details away. One thing I will say is that psychopaths aren't all your classic murderous criminals. Sometimes the nicest people you'll meet are psychopaths, and it's all an act to manipulate you to do what they want, or think a certain way about them, because that makes them feel like they've won and/or are superior to you. Watch out for the nice guys. This thread is interesting, so I thought I'd contribute. I'm not a psychologist, I'm a criminologist. Obviously it's not the same sort of thing and I've never been in a clinical situation, but you might be interested in some related experiences. Note here that I'm going to be very careful with my language in order to maintain professional integrity. Apologies for the stilted language. I've been to a couple of prisons for academic stuff and work. These are not actually all that interesting, because I knew what the people in there were for, and it wasn't as if I was surprised that some of them were psychopathic. But those would be my first experiences. But my area of professional and academic expertise is child sexual victimization. I've very occasionally seen psychopaths in the making, as it were. Victims who have been so terribly victimized and neglected that you can see them setting out on the path of an abuser or other type of criminal. It wasn't my responsibility to intervene, and I don't have any expertise in that area of things, but knowing the case histories, it was sad to watch. I've talked to a few police officers, social workers and so forth about a few of them. It's like watching a large tree toppling in slow motion. You know it's going to crash into the ground, but there's not much you can do about it. I have met, in a professional capacity, but in a roundabout sort of way as it's not the usual stuff I do, the relative of a serial killer who was also once his suspect. I came away from that meeting knowing with certainty that they were the guiding hand behind the crimes of the serial killer. The police were pretty sure as well, but there was simply no evidence. Both are now deceased, and frankly I'm not going to shed any tears for them. There was definitely familial abuse there as well. I have encountered some persons, a very small number, that were psychopathic and quite smart. This was through working within my field. One of these persons indicated that they were abusive towards animals in lieu of, or to work up to, children. I'm not going to repeat it, but what they said was something that haunts me to this day and I haven't even been able to repeat to my closest friends or even my psychologist. Another one of these persons escaped justice. A very smart person. It was no one's fault. The investigation was excellent. The police were great. Everything lined up, and a lot of justice was achieved. That person, however, escaped justice by being very smart. They were responsible for very serious, sustained offending and would definitely be classed as a psychopath. Last, I met a friend of a person who used to be within my social circle who was also victimized in their childhood. I have a suspicion, without any solid evidence, that they have committed serious crimes. They hold down a professional job and are very successful in life. From the standpoint of someone who cannot diagnose psychopathy and was not treating or analyzing them, but has studied it, I would say that they lack any real empathy or conscience. A lot of their emotions, but not all, seem to me to be a simulated and conscious act. The abuse they suffered was of the worst possible kind. As a result they were wary of most men, but warmed up to me a little due to the work I do. Abuse and neglect during the formative years seem to be a very common thread for many criminals and psychopaths. That said, I dare say there are some who are just strong in the head, but I, personally, haven't encountered any of that sort. I'll end this already too long post with a word of caution to everyone reading. It's very easy to be horrified of the actions of psychopaths and criminals. It's easy to be fascinated by their psychology. But these are people, just like we are. Most of the time, their actions can be traced back to what happened to them, how they interpreted it, how they learned from their life experiences. But for the lottery of birth, there aren't any evil monsters living under bridges or in forests. It's just us. We bear responsibility for the evil of psychopaths as a society, as communities and nations. We create the conditions for crime and evil. We are the monsters, and we create the monsters. As Oscar Wilde put it, we are each our own devil, and we make this world our hell.